In the summer of 1940, a press photographer who worked under the name Ouija stood on a lifeguard tower in southern Brooklyn and turned his camera on the sand instead of the sea. In the photograph he took, there is almost no beach, no visible gap between one human body and the next. The bathers nearest the lens are laughing and waving at a camera they have somehow noticed from 100 feet away. Behind them, the crowd recedes into a gray blur that does not stop until the horizon. The newspapers estimated 1 million people that day on a strip of sand a little over 2 miles long. Here is the part that makes no sense. That same decade, the largest amusement park on that beach had already passed through bankruptcy court. Within 4 years, it would burn and never reopen. Within 25 years, the last of the great parks would be demolished at a party thrown to celebrate its destruction. And for the better part of the next 4 decades, the most valuable stretch of oceanfront in the largest city in America would sit behind chain-link fencing, growing weeds. 1 million people came. The businesses failed anyway. Places usually die because people stop coming. Coney Island kept the crowds and lost everything else. To understand how that is possible, you have to go back to a question nobody thought to ask while the money was still good. Not how many people came, but how they got there, and what that journey cost them. Start with the land, because the land explains the first century. Coney Island was a sandbar. Dutch settlers called it Coney Island, Rabbit Island, which tells you what it was worth to them. Salt marsh, scrub, dunes, and rabbits. It could not be farmed. It flooded. For 200 years, its only economic function was that nobody wanted it. Then, in the 1820s, investors built a shell and timber causeway across the creek, separating the sandbar from Brooklyn. And in 1829, a hotel opened on the beach. The Coney Island House was a wooden building at the end of a bad road, but it sat 5 miles from a city growing at a rate no American city had grown before. And it offered the one commodity that city could not manufacture: cold salt air. That is the first domino. Not the beach, the distance. Getting there in 1830 meant a carriage, a toll, and the better part of a day. By the 1850s, a steamboat from Manhattan. The trip was long enough and expensive enough that only a particular kind of person made it. Herman Melville came, Washington Irving came, Walt Whitman came and swam, and declaimed poetry at the empty surf. The journey was the ticket price. Nobody had to enforce exclusivity because the geography enforced it for them. That detail matters more than it appears, and it will keep mattering for the next 150 years. Coney Island's entire economic model rested without anyone deciding it on the cost of arriving, which meant that the moment somebody made arriving cheap, everything would have to change. That somebody was a railroad man. In 1875, Andrew Culver ran a steam line from Brooklyn to the middle of the beach, and the trip collapsed from hours to minutes. Within 5 years, there were 5 rail lines and a fleet of iron steamers. The number of people who could reach Coney Island in a single afternoon went from hundreds to tens of thousands. The land responded exactly the way land does. It sorted. At the eastern end, a banker named Austin Corbin built his own railway to his own hotels. The Manhattan Beach Hotel in 1877, the Oriental in 1880. Bands on the lawn, fireworks every evening, guests in evening dress. It was the most refined resort on the Atlantic coast. In 1879, Corbin announced publicly that Jewish guests were not welcome at Manhattan Beach and that he intended to keep them out. He said it in the newspapers, without embarrassment, as a business proposition. The exclusion was the product. What he was selling was not the ocean. It was the certainty about who else would be standing in it. 2 miles west, the sorting produced the opposite result. The western end fell under the control of John Y. McCain, who held simultaneously the offices of town supervisor, police chief, fire chief, and head of the Board of Health for the town of Gravesend. Under McCain, the West End operated as a fully licensed vice district. Gambling houses, brothels, prize fights, unlicensed liquor. With the police force he commanded, ensuring the arrangement stayed profitable and undisturbed. Between the millionaires and the criminals, something else was growing. Bathhouses, beer gardens, carousels, freak shows, fried clams. A 122-foot hotel shaped like an elephant, built in 1885, with rooms in its legs and an observatory in its head, so notorious as a place of assignation that seeing the elephant entered the language as a euphemism. The middle of the beach had the crowds. What it did not have was legitimate capital, because no serious investor would put money into a district run by John Y. McCain. Then in 1894, McCain was convicted of election fraud and sent to Sing Sing. His fall is usually treated as a footnote about municipal corruption. It was actually the starting gun. With the machine broken and the land suddenly investable, the middle of Coney Island became the most interesting real estate in America. A place with 100,000 arriving visitors a day and no organizing idea about what to do with them. The men who arrived to answer that question would invent something the world had never seen. The first was a Civil War veteran turned professional daredevil named Paul Boynton, famous for crossing the English Channel in an inflatable rubber suit. In 1895, Boynton did something that sounds trivial and was not. He leased a plot of land, put a fence around it, installed a water slide called the Chute the Chutes and a colony of trained sea lions, and charged admission at the gate. Everything at Coney Island before that moment had been sold individually. A ride, a beer, a photograph, a bath. Boynton's Sea Lion Park sold something new: entry. Once you were inside, you were in a controlled environment, surrounded by attractions, with no reason to leave. That is the amusement park. It begins there, on a sandbar in Brooklyn, in 1895. Boynton was a showman, not a businessman, and a wet summer nearly finished him. 2 years later, a local man named George Tillieu took the idea and understood something Boynton had missed. Tillieu had grown up on that beach. His father had run a hotel there, and the family had been on the wrong side of McCain and suffered for it. He knew the crowds as neighbors, not as an abstraction. When he opened Steeplechase Park in 1897, he built it around an insight that would define the next 50 years of American entertainment. Tillieu's rides did not simply thrill people. They embarrassed them in public on purpose. The signature attraction was a mechanical horse race that carried couples around the outside of the park and deposited them, at the finish, onto a stage. There, in front of hundreds of seated strangers, a clown and a dwarf with an electric prod herded them across a floor fitted with hidden air jets that blew women's skirts up and knocked men's hats off. The audience howled, then bought tickets, rode the horses, and became the show for the next group. Tillieu was not selling rides. He was selling the crowd to itself. The customers were the entertainment, and they paid for the privilege of being it. It worked because of who was now arriving. The people stepping off Culver's trains were shop clerks and factory girls and immigrants 2 years off a ship, living in tenements where privacy did not exist and courtship was supervised. Steeplechase offered the one thing the 19th century denied them: a place where a young man and a young woman could be thrown against each other by a machine, in daylight, in public, and laugh about it. Coney Island's product was never the ocean, it was permission. Tillieu put it plainly enough: Americans want to be thrilled or amused, and will pay well for either. He was about to find out how well. In 1901, at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, 2 men were running the most successful attraction on the Midway: a simulated voyage to the moon aboard an airship, complete with dancing lunar midgets handing out green cheese. Frederick Thompson was the designer, a failed architecture student with a genius for spectacle. Elmer Dundee handled the money. Tillieu brought their ride to Steeplechase, and it earned so much money in a single season that Thompson and Dundee did what any 2 men in their position would do. They left, took over Boynton's failing Sea Lion Park, and spent an amount that terrified their investors, somewhere near $750,000, building their own. Luna Park opened in May 1903. Nothing about it was restrained. Thompson designed in a style he made up as he went: minarets, spires, arches, domes, belonging to no real architectural tradition, all of it staff plaster painted in colors that would have been unacceptable anywhere else on Earth, and 250,000 electric lights strung across the towers. That number needs a pause. In 1903, most of Brooklyn was still gaslit, and working people in the tenements lived in rooms lit by a single kerosene flame. Electric light was something you read about. Here, 25 minutes from the city, 250,000 bulbs came on at once at dusk and turned the sky over the Atlantic the color of daylight. People wept. Contemporary accounts say so repeatedly. Luna Park drew 4 million visitors in its first season. The response was immediate and enormous. A former state senator and real estate developer named William Reynolds looked at Luna's returns and concluded that Thompson's only mistake was vulgarity. Across the street, Reynolds spent $3.5 million, 5 times what Luna cost, on Dreamland. Dreamland was the most beautiful thing ever built on that beach. 1 million lights instead of 250,000. A central tower 375 feet high. Everything painted white in the classical style of the Great World's Fairs, with a lagoon and a pier and a colonnade. It was tasteful, coherent, and expensive. It was also, from the first day, less popular than Luna Park. The crowds walked past the white colonnade and went next door to the place with the fake minarets and the moon rocket. Reynolds had built for the audience he thought Coney Island ought to have. Thompson had built for the one that actually got off the train. On the night of May 27, 1911, workmen making late repairs to a ride called Hellgate tipped a bucket of hot tar. The fire took the whole park. The million lights failed early, so the men fighting the blaze fought it in the dark, while animals escaped from the Dreamland Circus into the streets. By morning, $3.5 million was a field of ash and standing water. Dreamland was never rebuilt. That decision is the real event, not the fire. Fires were routine on that beach. Steeplechase had burned to the ground in 1907, and Tillieu had put a sign in the ruins the next morning, offering 10-cent admission to view the wreckage while he rebuilt bigger. So why did Dreamland's owners walk away? Because by 1911, the arithmetic had changed. The land under Coney Island had become worth more than the businesses standing on it. The crowds had proved the value of the location so thoroughly that the location no longer needed the crowd's money. Popularity and profitability were beginning to separate. 9 years later, the split became permanent. In 1920, the subway reached Coney Island. Before 1920, reaching that beach from Manhattan cost a fare a working family had to plan around. After 1920, it cost 5 cents from anywhere in the 5 boroughs on a train that ran all night. The barrier that had defined Coney Island since 1829, the cost of arriving, was gone. The crowds became something without precedent. Not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. On hot Sundays through the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the estimates ran past 1 million people in a single day. Memorial Day 1947 was put at 1.3 million, and the businesses on that beach began, quietly, to die. Here is why. The nickel fare did not just bring more people, it brought a different transaction. The visitor who had spent $1.50 a day getting there arrived committed. A hotel room, a full dinner, park admission, the whole weekend. The visitor who spent 5 cents arrived owing nothing. He could come for 3 hours after work, swim in the free ocean, and go home. Watch the price of a hot dog track the change. Charles Feltman had been selling sausages on that beach since the 1860s at a dime apiece. In 1916, a former Feltman's employee named Nathan Handwerker opened a stand a few blocks away, charged 5 cents, and built an empire on the difference. Feltman's, by then a restaurant complex seating thousands, would eventually close entirely. The winning business model on Coney Island was now the one that assumed its customer had almost no money. And the city, with the best intentions, drove the change deeper. In 1923, it opened the Regalman Boardwalk, 80 feet wide, running for miles, magnificent and free. Coney Island got better every year and cheaper every year at once. The parks kept building against the tide. The Wonder Wheel went up in 1920. The Cyclone opened in 1927 with an 85-foot first drop that is still, nearly a century later, genuinely frightening. But Luna Park entered the Depression carrying debt against an audience with 5 cents in its pocket, and it did not come out. By the mid-1930s, the park that had once drawn 4 million people a season was in the hands of the courts. In August 1944, Luna Park caught fire. Nobody rebuilt it. Nobody had rebuilt Dreamland either. The pattern was now 33 years old and unmistakable. At Coney Island, the fires were not the disaster. The refusal to rebuild was. By then, though, the decision was no longer entirely up to the owners. Someone else had begun deciding what Coney Island was going to be. Robert Moses became New York's Parks Commissioner in 1934, looked at Coney Island, and saw something that offended him: a great public beach with a shabby commercial carnival squatting on it. He never hid it. He regarded the amusement district as a blight to be replaced with the things he believed people should want: clean beach, open parkland, orderly housing. So he set about it. He widened the beach and moved the boardwalk back, taking amusement land. He shrank the zone in which rides could operate. When Luna Park's site came free, apartment buildings went up. When the Dreamland site found a permanent tenant in 1957, it was the New York Aquarium, a fine institution and a public one that closes at 5 and sells no tickets after dark. Every one of those decisions made Coney Island a better public beach. Every one of them shrank the private business that had paid for everything. But Moses had already done something 20 years earlier that mattered more than all of it. In 1929, he opened Jones Beach, 30 miles east on Long Island, and he built it for the automobile. Parkways, parking fields, bathhouses in cut stone, clean, uncrowded, and reachable only by car. Coney Island had been built for the train. 19th century streets, no parking, a geometry that assumed visitors arriving on foot from a station. As American families acquired cars through the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the ones with money drove east, which left Coney Island with exactly the crowd the nickel fare delivered: enormous, local, and broke. And now the deepest irony in the story, the one that took 60 years to become visible. Go back to what Tillyou actually sold in 1897. Not rides, proximity. The thrill of being pressed against strangers, the permission to be anonymous in a crowd, to be laughed at by people you would never see again, to escape the surveillance of the tenement and the parish and the family. Coney Island monetized density. After the Second World War, America was handed the opposite. Air conditioning meant the tenement no longer emptied onto the street in July. Television meant spectacle arrived in the living room for free. The car solved distance. And the suburbs meant that millions of the exact families who had once ridden the train to Coney Island now owned a private lawn, a private pool club, a private life. The thing Coney Island had been selling since 1897, enforced intimacy with a million strangers, became precisely what Americans were spending their money to escape. The crowds did not stop. They changed. They became local, poorer, and increasingly the population that could not leave. Steeplechase held on longest because Tillyou had built better than anyone. It closed in September 1964. The following year, the property was bought by a Brooklyn builder named Fred Trump, who meant to put luxury apartments on it. In 1966, before the city could consider landmarking the Pavilion of Fun, he threw a party. Guests, bricks handed out, and the stained glass windows of Steeplechase's grinning funny face shattered on camera. Then the wrecking ball went in. The rezoning never came. The apartments were never built. The land where Steeplechase Park had stood for 67 years sat empty for the next 35. The remaining blocks emptied. Arson became an industry. The blackout of 1977 took what the fires had missed. The high-rise housing Moses had championed, filled with families who had no summer economy left to work in, on a peninsula with one of the highest poverty rates in the city and a 9-month winter with nothing open. The Thunderbolt, a wooden coaster shuttered since 1982, was demolished by emergency order in 2000. Astroland, which had opened in 1962 and carried the beach through the worst years almost single-handed, closed in 2008. And yet the Cyclone kept running, declared a city landmark in 1988, a wooden roller coaster protected by law as a historic monument, which is a strange thing for a ride to become. Nathan's kept frying. The Wonder Wheel turned. In 2001, a minor league ballpark opened on the empty Steeplechase site, and in 2010, an Italian ride company reopened a park under the borrowed name Luna, on ground the city rezoned in 2009 and now largely controls. Return to the photograph. 1,000,000 people on 2 miles of sand in a place that was already failing while the shutter opened. It looks like a contradiction. It is the answer, sitting in plain sight. Coney Island was built on a filter nobody designed. For its first 90 years, the ocean was free, but the journey was not. And everything on that beach, the hotels, the parks, the fences, the 10-cent hot dogs, was financed by people who had already proved they could pay to arrive. Every improvement in access brought more people and less money from each of them. The steam trains diluted the hotels. The nickel subway dissolved the parks. The automobile removed the paying customers altogether and left the beach to the people who lived within walking distance of it. The crowds were never the customers. That was the mistake. And it stayed invisible for as long as the two happened to overlap. There is no villain here, though there are candidates. Corbyn's bigotry, McCain's corruption, Reynolds' misjudgment, Moses's contempt, Trump's wrecking ball, each accelerated something already moving. What actually happened is simpler and harder to argue with. A resort that depended on being expensive to reach was made free to reach in the most densely populated city in America, and the arithmetic followed. Millions still come every season. There is no gate, no fence, and very little left to buy. The Cyclone runs the same track it ran in 1927. The Wonder Wheel turns above a beach the city rebuilt, maintains, and gives away. Coney Island did not fall because people stopped coming. It fell because everyone kept coming. And the one thing it had always quietly charged them for was the trip.